Ryan Parker had no idea that one small decision would change everything. One minute, he was driving home after a long shift at the auto shop, and the next, he spotted a woman standing on the side of the road, staring at her car like she was willing it to fix itself. The rain had just started, light droplets hitting his windshield, but it was enough to make the night feel colder than it was. He almost kept driving. He was exhausted, and honestly, helping strangers wasn't something he went out of his way to do. But something about the way she stood there, arms crossed, shoulders tense, frustration clear on her face, made him pull over before he could think twice. She turned as he stepped out of his truck, her eyes narrowing slightly in suspicion. She was beautiful, even under the dim glow of the streetlight. Dark, wavy hair framed her face, and her deep brown eyes held a mix of annoyance and caution. "Need some help?" Ryan asked, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. She exhaled, clearly relieved but trying to hide it. "Unless you can magically fix a flat tire, yeah, I could use some help," Ryan smirked. "Lucky for you, that's exactly what I do for a living." Her eyebrows lifted. "Seriously?" "Mechanic," he confirmed. She let out a breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Well then, I guess I hit the jackpot." Ryan crouched down, inspecting the damage. "Spare tire in the trunk." She nodded and moved to open it while he grabbed his tools from his truck. As he worked, she crouched down beside him, watching. "I'm Lexi, by the way," she said. "Ryan." "Well, Ryan, you just saved my night." "I was about 5 minutes away from calling my dad and listening to a 30-minute lecture on why I should always check my tires." Ryan chuckled. "Sounds like something dads do," she sighed. "Yeah, especially mine. He thinks I'm still 16 and helpless." Ryan glanced at her, taking in the determined set of her jaw. "Something tells me you're far from helpless." She smiled, and for some reason, it hit him harder than it should have. It was warm, genuine, and something about it made his chest tighten in a way he didn't expect. Within 10 minutes, the spare was on, and Ryan stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're all set." Lexi stood too, brushing her hair out of her face. "That was fast." "I think I owe you a drink or something." Ryan blinked. He hadn't expected that. "You don't owe me anything." She tilted her head, considering him. "I know, but I want to." Ryan hesitated. He wasn't the type to say yes to things like this. He kept to himself, worked his job, and didn't go out of his way to make connections. But something about Lexi made it hard to say no. "All right," he said. "One drink," she grinned. "Good, I know a place nearby." As they got into their cars and he followed her down the road, Ryan had the strangest feeling that this wasn't just a random act of kindness. That somehow, stopping for her tonight was about to change everything. The bar Lexi led him to was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place that didn't attract a rowdy crowd but had enough life to feel inviting. The dim lighting, the low hum of conversation, and the faint scent of whiskey and wood created an atmosphere that felt intimate without trying too hard. Ryan followed her inside, unsure of what he was doing. He wasn't the type to go for spontaneous drinks with strangers, let alone women who looked like Lexi, like they belonged to a different world than the one he lived in. They found a small booth in the corner, and she slid in across from him, her brown eyes studying him with a curiosity that made his skin prickle. "So, Ryan," she said, propping her elbow on the table, "do you always stop to help stranded women, or am I just lucky?" He smirked, leaning back against the booth. "You're lucky." "I usually mind my own business." She tilted her head. "Good thing I caught you on an off night then." The waiter appeared, and they both ordered drinks, whiskey for him, a rum and coke for her. As they waited, the conversation flowed more easily than Ryan expected. "So, mechanic, huh?" she asked, tracing the rim of her glass when it arrived. "Is that what you always wanted to do?" He shrugged. "I guess. Always liked working with my hands. Didn't see much point in drowning in student loans when I could do something I was good at." She nodded, taking a sip of her drink. "Makes sense. My dad would like you." Ryan arched a brow. "Yeah." "Oh, definitely. He's all about people who work hard, don't take shortcuts. He runs a small business construction, built most of the houses in our old neighborhood. Ryan could picture it, a man who probably had calloused hands, a strong work ethic, and a stubborn streak. Sounds like a tough guy, she laughed. You have no idea. The conversation shifted naturally from there. Lexi told him about her job in event planning, how she spent her days organizing weddings, corporate parties, and fundraisers. Ryan listened, intrigued by how animated she got when she talked about it. People think it's all fun and glamour, but it's a lot of stress, she admitted. One wrong order, one late vendor, and it's like the world is ending for some people, Ryan smirked. Sounds exhausting. Sometimes, she agreed. But there's something satisfying about seeing everything come together in the end. Watching people have the night of their lives because of something you made happen, that's worth it. Ryan found himself watching her more than he should have. The way her lips curved when she spoke, the way her fingers played with the condensation on her glass. She was easy to talk to in a way that made him forget he'd just met her. You're not from around here, are you? She asked after a while. He shook his head. Moved here a few years ago. Needed a change. From what? He hesitated. That was a question he didn't usually answer. Just old life, old mistakes. She studied him for a moment, then nodded like she understood. Fair enough. The night stretched on longer than he expected. One drink turned into two, then three. He should have left after the first one, should have thanked her for the offer and gone home like he always did. But something about Lexi made it impossible to walk away. At some point she leaned in, resting her chin on her hand. You ever get the feeling you were supposed to meet someone? Ryan's chest tightened. He exhaled, staring into his glass. Yeah, he admitted, surprising himself. Her lips parted slightly, like she hadn't expected him to say that. The air between them felt heavier, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Lexi broke the moment first, clearing her throat and glancing at her phone. Wow, it's late. Ryan checked his watch, nearly midnight. He hadn't even noticed. I should probably call it a night, she said, though she didn't look like she wanted to leave. Yeah, Ryan agreed, but his voice lacked conviction. They stood, and he walked her outside, the night air cooler now. She hesitated by her car, biting her lip like she was debating something. Then, before he could think, she stepped closer and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thanks for the drink, she murmured, her breath warm against his skin. Ryan swallowed hard, his pulse kicking up. Anytime. She lingered a second longer, then smiled and slipped into her car. Ryan stood there as she drove away, his heart pounding for reasons he didn't want to analyze. He had no idea what just happened, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't done with Lexi. Not even close. Ryan tried to push Lexi from his mind, but it was impossible. The next morning, as he tightened the bolts on a customer's engine, his mind kept drifting back to the way she'd smiled at him in that dimly lit bar, the way she'd leaned in, her voice soft and teasing, as if she was daring him to get closer. And then that kiss, a simple brush of her lips against his cheek, but it had scorched him all the same. Yo, Ryan, you alive in there? He blinked, snapping out of his thoughts as his coworker Jason leaned against the garage wall, smirking. You've been staring at that engine for 5 minutes straight. What's up? Ryan exhaled, closing the hood with a little more force than necessary. Nothing, Jason cocked a brow. Right. 'Cause you always look like someone just rewired your brain overnight. Ryan shot him a glare and grabbed a rag to wipe the grease from his hands. Just thinking. Jason crossed his arms. About what? Ryan hesitated. He wasn't the type to talk about this kind of thing. But for some reason, the words tumbled out before he could stop them. Met someone last night. Jason's eyebrows shot up. Oh, Ryan regretted saying anything the second he saw the stupid grin forming on his friend's face. Relax, Ryan muttered. It's not like that, Jason scoffed. Dude, it's always like that the second you start overthinking it. Ryan rolled his eyes and turned toward the shop's main entrance, but Jason wasn't done. So who is she? Ryan sighed. Her name's Lexi. I helped her with a flat tire. She bought me a drink. Jason let out an exaggerated whistle. A drink. Damn, Parker, sounds like a real fairy tale. Ryan shook his head, but the teasing didn't bother him as much as it usually would, because the truth was, it had felt like something. Something he couldn't quite explain but also couldn't ignore. Jason studied him for a beat, then smirked. "You gonna see her again?" Ryan hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his breath catching slightly when he saw the name on the screen. Lexi. He stared at it for a second longer than necessary before answering. "Hey. Hey, stranger," she said, her voice light but with an edge of something else. "So I have a confession." Ryan leaned against the counter. "Yeah. I may have, kinda sorta, looked up your shop." Ryan's lips twitched. "Oh yeah, MMHMM. And since I happen to be in the area, I figured I'd stop by, if that's okay." Ryan's pulse kicked up, but he kept his voice even. "You looking for another free tire change?" She laughed, and the sound sent something warm through his chest. "No, but I wouldn't say no to another drink. Unless you're too busy." Ryan met Jason's knowing gaze, then turned away. "I think I can make time." 15 minutes later, Lexi strolled into the shop, looking completely out of place in her sleek black jeans and fitted leather jacket. She stood out against the grease-stained uniforms and scent of motor oil, but she didn't seem to mind. "Wow," she said, glancing around. "This is very car-y." Ryan smirked. "That's kind of the point." She grinned. "I guess I was expecting something with a little more ambience." "Maybe a chandelier." Jason coughed to cover a laugh from the back of the shop, and Ryan shot him a look before turning back to her. "I'll put in a request for one." "Good," she said. "In the meantime, how about that drink?" Ryan glanced at the clock. He still had an hour left on his shift, but suddenly he didn't care. He grabbed his jacket from the hook and nodded toward the door. "Let's go." They ended up at a small cafe a few blocks away, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that changed daily. It was quieter than the bar from the night before, more intimate. Lexi ordered a caramel latte, Ryan stuck with black coffee, and they took a seat near the window. "So," she said, stirring her drink, "tell me something about you that I don't already know." Ryan leaned back. "You don't know much at all." "Exactly," she said, tilting her head. "So let's fix that." Ryan considered her for a moment. He wasn't usually one to spill details about himself, but there was something about Lexi that made him want to. "I used to box," he said finally. Lexi's eyes widened slightly. "Really?" He nodded. "Did it for years, almost went pro." She leaned in, intrigued. "What happened?" Ryan hesitated. That was a part of his past he didn't like revisiting. Life happened. Lexi didn't push, which he appreciated. Instead, she smiled. "I can see it now." "You in a ring, all serious and broody." Ryan smirked. "I wasn't broody." She raised an eyebrow. "You're broody now," he chuckled. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Lexi sighed. "I like this." Ryan glanced at her. "Like what?" She shrugged. "Talking to you feels easy." Ryan exhaled because damn if he didn't feel the same way. "Yeah," he admitted. "It does." Lexi's gaze softened and something passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. Ryan knew in that moment that he was in trouble, because Lexi wasn't just a passing stranger. She was something more, and for the first time in a long time he didn't want to fight it. Ryan knew he should be cautious. He wasn't the type to dive headfirst into anything, especially not when it came to women, but with Lexi it was different. There was no overthinking, no second-guessing. It was like gravity pulling him toward her whether he wanted it or not. They started seeing each other more frequently after that cafe visit. It wasn't planned, it wasn't forced. It just happened. A text here, a quick meetup there. And before Ryan even realized it, she was slipping into his life like she'd always belonged there. One evening, Lexi showed up at the shop again, leaning against the doorframe with that mischievous smile that always made his pulse spike. "You stalking me now?" Ryan teased, wiping his hands on a rag. Lexi smirked. "Please." "Like I'd waste my time stalking you." She wandered inside, her fingers trailing along the edge of the tool bench as she glanced around. Actually, I was in the area. Thought I'd see if you wanted to grab dinner. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Dinner? Yeah, you know, that thing where people sit together, eat food, and talk, Ryan chuckled. I know what dinner is, smartass. Just didn't expect you to keep showing up like this. Lexi shrugged. Maybe I like keeping you on your toes. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head. But he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. Let me lock up. They ended up at a small diner just outside of town, the kind of place that had been around forever, with faded booths and a jukebox that barely worked. It was quiet, comfortable. Lexi slid into the booth across from him, propping her elbows on the table. So, tell me, Ryan Parker, what do you do when you're not fixing cars? Ryan leaned back, studying her. You really want to know? Lexi nodded. Of course, I'm trying to piece you together. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right, I box sometimes, just to keep in shape. Other than that, not much. Lexi tilted her head. No hobbies, no secret talents, Ryan smirked. Not unless you count being able to rebuild an engine blindfolded, Lexi laughed. That's impressive, but not exactly what I was looking for, Ryan shrugged. I keep things simple. Lexi studied him for a moment, her playful expression softening. You don't let people in easily, do you? Ryan stiffened slightly. She wasn't wrong. No, he admitted. Lexi nodded like she understood. She didn't pry, didn't push. Instead, she reached for her drink and took a sip. Well, for what it's worth, I like what I know so far. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't used to this someone wanting to know him, really know him, without expectation or judgment. And damn, if that didn't terrify him more than anything. As the night stretched on, something shifted between them. It wasn't just playful banter anymore. It was something deeper, something heavier. And Ryan knew, without a doubt, that he was falling. Hard, Ryan had never been the kind of guy who let someone in easily. He kept his walls high, his emotions locked away where no one could reach them. But Lexi. She was tearing them down without even trying. It wasn't just the way she looked at him, like she saw past all the rough edges and into something deeper. It wasn't just the way she laughed, or the way she challenged him, or the way she made his world feel a little less heavy. It was everything, and that scared the hell out of him. But it also made him want more. Their nights together became routine in the best way. Sometimes it was late-night drives with no destination, windows down, music low, and comfortable silence stretching between them. Other times, it was sitting on the hood of her car, sharing greasy takeout and talking about things Ryan had never told anyone before. She told him about her childhood, about growing up with a father who loved her fiercely but protected her even more. About the expectations placed on her shoulders, about how she always felt like she had to prove she could stand on her own. He told her about his past, about the fights he used to be in not just in the ring, but outside of it. About how anger had once been the only thing that made sense to him, how he'd nearly let it ruin him. She didn't judge, she just listened. And that was when Ryan knew he was in too deep. One night, as they sat by the river just outside of town, Lexi turned to him, her expression unreadable. You ever think about what you really want? She asked softly. Ryan glanced at her, the reflection of the water casting flickering light across her face. What do you mean? She hugged her knees to her chest. I mean, beyond just surviving. Beyond getting through the day. What do you want? Ryan exhaled, staring out at the water. No one had ever asked him that before. For a long time, he'd thought he didn't deserve to want anything. But now, his eyes flicked back to her, and the truth settled in his chest like a weight he wasn't ready to carry. The word burned in his throat, but he couldn't say it. He didn't know how. So instead, he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Lexi didn't pull away. She just squeezed his hand back like she already knew. Like she'd known all along, but good things never came easy. Ryan should have known that. A few days later, he walked into the shop only to be met with the last person he ever expected to see, Lexi's father. Ryan knew who he was the second he laid eyes on him. Broad shoulders, weathered hands, the kind of presence that filled a room without even trying. A man who had built things from the ground up and didn't take kindly to people who didn't measure up. He was standing near the counter, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ryan wiped the grease from his hands and approached, keeping his voice steady. "Can I help you?" Lexi's father studied him for a long moment. "You're Ryan Parker." Ryan nodded. The older man exhaled, glancing around the shop before settling his gaze back on Ryan. "I hear you've been spending time with my daughter." Ryan's spine stiffened, but he didn't look away. "I have." There was no point in denying it. Lexi's father shifted his weight. "Look, I don't know much about you, but I know my daughter, and I know she doesn't let people in easily." Ryan swallowed hard. "Neither do I." The man tilted his head as if weighing his words. "Then let me give you some advice. Don't waste her time. If you're not serious, walk away now." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I don't plan on walking away." Lexi's father studied him for a beat longer, then gave a small nod. "Good. Then don't give me a reason to make you." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Ryan standing there, heart pounding. Because for the first time in his life, he realized something. He was serious, and that terrified him more than anything ever had. Ryan couldn't shake the conversation with Lexi's father. It stayed with him, gnawed at him, made him question everything. Not about how he felt about Lexi, he knew exactly how he felt. But whether or not he was the kind of man who deserved her, he wasn't blind. He knew he came with baggage, with a past that wasn't clean, with a life that didn't fit neatly into the world Lexi came from. She deserved stability, someone who knew how to love her the way she needed to be loved, and Ryan wasn't sure if that was him. But when he saw her later that evening, all of that doubt faded into the background. She showed up at his place unannounced, her eyes searching his face the second he opened the door. "You okay?" she asked. Ryan hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. She wandered inside, her presence filling the small space like she belonged there, and maybe she did. Ryan closed the door, exhaling slowly. "Saw your dad today." Lexi froze, then turned to face him fully. "What?" "He came by the shop," Ryan admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Wanted to know if I was serious about you." Lexi's expression turned wary. "And what did you say?" Ryan met her gaze, his chest tightening. "I told him I wasn't walking away." Lexi's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching. "Ryan, but it got me thinking," he continued, his voice rougher than he intended, "about what you deserve. About whether or not I'm the right guy for you." Lexi's brows drew together, frustration flashing in her eyes. "Are you seriously trying to decide that for me?" Ryan swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. "I don't want to be something you regret." Lexi let out a sharp breath and closed the distance between them in 2 steps, her hands pressing firmly against his chest. "You listen to me, Ryan Parker," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't need you to decide what's best for me. I know what I want, and it's you." Ryan's heart slammed against his ribs. Lexi's fingers curled into his shirt. "I don't care about your past. I don't care what anyone else thinks. You don't get to push me away because you think you're not good enough." Ryan's throat tightened. "Lexi, no," she interrupted, her voice fierce. "I'm not finished." Ryan stared at her, his chest aching. Lexi's eyes burned with raw emotion. "You think I don't have doubts too? That I don't wonder if this is crazy, if we're moving too fast, if we'll crash and burn?" Ryan exhaled shakily. "Do you?" Lexi's expression softened. "Yeah," she took a deep breath. "But then I remember how I feel when I'm with you, and none of it matters." Ryan felt something inside him crack wide open. Lexi cupped his face, her touch gentle, grounding. "I love you, Ryan." Ryan froze. Lexi's eyes searched his. "I love you," she repeated, her voice quieter this time, like she was giving him the space to run if he needed to, but Ryan didn't run. Instead, he crushed his mouth to hers, pouring everything he couldn't say into the kiss. Lexi gasped against his lips, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. Ryan kissed her like she was the only thing keeping him breathing, like he needed her to survive. Because maybe he did. When they finally broke apart, Lexi's forehead rested against his, her breath uneven. Ryan's hands framed her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "I love you too," he whispered. Lexi let out a shaky laugh, her eyes shining with relief. Ryan swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I'm probably gonna mess up." "A lot," Lexi smiled, her fingers tracing the back of his neck. "Then we'll figure it out together." Ryan exhaled, a slow, steady breath that felt like the first real breath he'd taken in years. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of what came next, because no matter what, Lexi would be there. And that was all he needed.